just a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, look over there. Again, Jezreel Valley, which I pointed out to you earlier when we were on Megiddo. Something to keep in mind because I really want to talk about it, but I can't talk about it right now, even though Benny's like, now would be the time. If I get a chance, I want to talk about the Jezreel Valley because it's huge. Actually, so far, that's what's blown me away the most because it's so important in the Old Testament. But we got Nazareth. I can't not talk about Nazareth, right? So right behind you, the city of Nazareth. There's a passage I wanted to look at here. I didn't know this until Benny shared it with me on the way up here. But Luke chapter 4, verse 16. So he came to Nazareth, this is Jesus, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." Then he closed the book and he gave it back to the attendant and he sat down. The eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. He began to say to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So all bore witness to him, and they marveled at his gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" Guys, you got to keep in mind, they grew up with him, right? Like, they'd known him his whole life. They knew Joseph. They're like, this is Joseph's son. I remember years ago, my roommate somehow managed to grace the cover of USA Today as a pastor. He was on an article that they did on mega churches. And I was literally standing in the line at school, and a parent drove by and said, "Tom, isn't this your old roommate?" and handed me The Nation's magazine, and he was on the cover, and it's an article on mega churches. And I called him up. I was like, "Dude, you're on the cover of USA Today." And he goes, "I know," and he starts talking about it. And then halfway through the conversation, he got very pastorly with me, which, don't get me wrong, he wasn't wrong here. But in my mind, I was like, dude, don't try to pastor me. I lived with you when you were 19 years old. I know you do not clean your room. I know you do not change your socks. Like, the point is that when there's that familiarity, you know the saying, familiarity breeds contempt, right? And as the scriptures say, a prophet, well, actually, let's keep reading. You'll see here. Verse 23, he said to them, "You will surely say this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in your own country.' And he said, 'Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country.'" His point being that when you grow up with a prophet, the prophet is not a prophet, right? He's just some guy that you've known his whole life. And so Jesus is like, you guys can't accept who I am. "I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up in 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout the land," which we talked about earlier. "But to none of them was Elijah sent, except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon," not an Israeli settlement. He went to the Phoenicians. He lived with a Phoenician woman. "And many lepers were in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." A Syrian was cleansed, not a Jewish man. And that's offensive. His point was, who accepted Elijah and Elisha? A Syrian and a Phoenician. That's who accepted Elijah and Elisha, not his own countrymen. They rejected them. And so he's basically saying, so too with me. And then all those who were in the synagogue, when they heard these things, they were filled with wrath. And here's the key verse. "And they rose up and they thrust him out of the city. And they led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff." And that's right here. Yeah. They brought him up here to throw him off this cliff. That's what Benny shared on the way up. I had no idea. He'd just been saying we were going up the precipice, and I was like, okay, whatever that is. Right? And then verse 30, "Then passing through the midst of them, he went on his way." Miraculously, in all their wrath and anger, he was able to just walk right by them. Why? Because his time had not yet come. The one thing I wanted to say, John, you don't need to turn there, but John 1:46. You guys know the story of Nathanael, one of my favorites. When Jesus is calling Nathanael, you got Philip. Philip goes to Nathanael and he goes, "Hey, there's this guy and we think he's the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth." And Nathanael goes, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" I think it was so fitting, probably inappropriate of me, that when we were driving up, I go, "Why is all this trash here on the ground?" I'm like, is this like just regular trash heap or what? But here's the thing, as I'm looking at them, I go, how appropriate, right? Nazareth. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And the answer is absolutely something good can, not only can something good come from Nazareth, the greatest thing our world has ever beheld came from Nazareth. And what I love about it is, a little later, also in the Gospel of John, some of the Pharisees say, when the Messiah comes, no man will know where he's from. No man will know. But we know where this guy's from. He's from Nazareth. And here's the thing. They didn't know his story. He was from Nazareth. They didn't know the story about him going to Bethlehem, which, of course, the wise men were told by when they came that the prophets had said he was going to come from Bethlehem. That's why no man would know where the Messiah had come from, because his beginnings were going to be all confused because he had this confusing backstory. What I love about it is the Lord picked a village in which nothing glorious had happened, nothing big had happened. It was not some place that held kind of the mindset of the Israeli people. It just was a nothing of a place. And that's what the Lord does. He takes nothings and he makes them not just into some things, he makes them into the biggest things the world has ever seen. And so he takes the weak, and with the weak he confounds the strong. And so what did he do? He took a poor carpenter from Nazareth and made him into the King of Kings.